Hello and welcome. My name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really glad you're here. For October this year, I've decided to look back and find some older true crime stories that have some sort of spooky detail to them. Now, today's story is of the Hammersmith ghost, and it takes place in 1803 to 1805 in Hammersmith, England. This story will talk about ghost sightings, mistaken murder, and the trial that followed. If that sounds interesting to you, then join me for the ride. November 1803. A young man is walking through a graveyard with his friend. It was the evening, it was dark, and he says that he was accosted by a ghost. It grabbed him by the throat, but when the young man fought to get free of him, there was no one there. He pushed forward with his fists. He felt something soft, maybe like a coat, but before he could get a sight of it, it disappeared behind a gravestone. He called out, and his friend who had walked in front of him hurried back to find his friend now very frightened, but all alone. There was nothing around. There had been sightings of this ghost in the area for months. It was rumored to be covered in white billowing clothes and then it grew to include that it had devil horns and red glowing eyes, which is not surprising. All of us have played the telephone game, right? Where you say something, whisper something to someone, and it works its way around the group, and when it gets back to you, it's completely different. So it makes perfect sense to me that the gossip would grow to include devil horns and glowing eyes. Okay, I have a couple more stories of people who interacted with this ghost. Now, one of the stories is that of a pregnant woman and an elderly woman became so terrified of the ghost that they died 2 days after witnessing it. Doesn't sound like we have enough details on that one, but okay. The next is a carriage driver would nearly cause the death of all of his passengers when he was startled at the sight of the ghost. And he became so frightened that he lost control of the carriage. Now, he would gain control back and everyone would be fine, but he would explain that momentary loss by the fact that he had seen this ghost. Yet another story is of a man who was less skittish than the people who had spotted it before. And when he spotted that spectral form, he gave chase. He later replied that the ghost shed its white clothing, thought to be some sort of sheet, and ran off. Sound like a ghost to me, but okay. A group of men who were authorized by the government at the time, who I believe was a baron, there was a baron that was in charge of this particular town, to help deter criminal activity. They were called the Watchmen of Hammersmith, and they also were used for community actions when needed, like if there was a fire, they would be sent to fight it. But for the most part, they were there to really stop criminal activity. Now, I think for the most part, they didn't really believe it was necessarily a ghost. But to be honest, from everything I can figure out, they really didn't care, right? They just wanted to find out who or what this thing was and stop it. They wanted their neighborhood to be nice and safe and one that didn't have a population terrified of leaving their houses after dark, which is totally fair. Okay, so a man by the name of Thomas Millwood would come to this town. Thomas was a bricklayer, and the clothes that he wore for his work consisted of white pants, white shirt, and white waistcoat. His mother-in-law had expressed worry at him remaining in these clothes at nighttime, as he was once almost mistaken for the ghost himself. One evening during the summer of 1804, he went to call on his parents and ended up chatting with his sister, Anne. He told his sister he was waiting for his wife to finish work so that he could walk her home. When the night watchman announced that it was 11 o'clock, because that's how you knew what time it was, he felt it was time to head out and meet his wife. His sister would watch him go. Meanwhile, Francis Smith and John Locke were both part of the Watchmen of Hammersmith group. And they went out on that very same evening to patrol the area. The two men chatted for a bit and then headed off in their own directions. Like they each had a different area to patrol. To Francis Smith's surprise, on his way, he saw a figure dressed in all white. He called out to the man, but there was no response. Meanwhile, as Thomas Millwood's sister Anne watched him walk from her house, she heard shouting. She heard, "Damn you! Who are you? What are you? Damn you! I will shoot you." And Anne heard more speaking. She heard a gun go off as well. She ran into the dark, located her brother on the ground, who was not responding, and then she ran off to get help. Meanwhile, Francis Smith slowly moved forward towards Thomas's body and became extremely distraught when he saw a man dressed in white with a bullet hole running with very real human blood. He ran off shaking, trying to find help. Francis would locate John Locke, his partner for the evening, as well as other members of the Watchmen, and bring them back to where Thomas lay. John Locke would locate the bullet hole in Thomas's neck and turn to Francis and tell him to go home until they could sort everything out. Thomas was then moved to an inn where a surgeon inspected his body, and he would confirm that he was indeed killed by a bullet that severed his spinal cord. Francis would be taken to court due to the killing. He admitted that he shot the gun, but he entered a plea of not guilty. The only witness to the event was Anne, who had only heard evidence but had not seen it. She insisted that her brother would not have had time to respond to Francis's inquiry that night before he was fatally shot. The jury was conflicted. They were impressed with Francis's handling of the incident. He did not run away, and he admitted to having fired the gun, right? So, it's just like kids when your parents tell you they'd rather you tell an unpleasant truth than hear a lie. So it's the same with the courts. The more truthful you can prove you're being, the better things are going to go for you, right? So the jury knew that for this event to be considered murder, there had to be some kind of malice intent. And in this case, there was not. But at the same time, the gun was not fired in self-defense, and it was not fired by accident. So that leaves them really, really confused, right? These two conflicting arguments would lead the jury to find Francis Smith guilty of manslaughter. Makes perfect sense to me. I mean, in our day and age, manslaughter is you killed someone, but you didn't intend to, right? That sounds like what happened. But the judge was not okay with this outcome. He would not accept this sentence. He would meet with other judges in the area, and all together they would decide and then decree that the jury needed to either find him guilty of murder or acquit him completely of the crime. Those were their only two choices. After further deliberation, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death by hanging, followed by dissection. Apparently, they liked that sentence back then. If you saw my upload about Marie Martin, the same sentence was applied in that case, too. When Francis heard the verdict, he cried out and had to be carried back to his cell. Now, the baron of the town at the time, knowing how popular this case had become, his town had almost doubled in size for this trial. This was a big deal. There wasn't a lot going on back then, so this was something that could entertain people. And he also knew that Francis Smith had garnered a great deal of sympathy and support from the people of the town. So the baron decided that the best thing that he could do is to just defer the case to the King of England. Just take it off my plate and give it to someone else. So by 7 p.m. that evening, his sentence had been commuted to 1 year of hard labor. And on July 14th, 1805, Francis Smith was given a full pardon. Cool. Glad they gave it over to the King of England. Because I certainly don't think that he deserved to be hanged for mistakenly shooting someone. Punished, but... 2 days after the fatal shooting of Thomas Millwood, a local man by the name of John Graham, who was a shoe and bootmaker, came forward and told a story of how his apprentices had been scaring his grandchildren with ghost stories. So he had decided to act like a ghost to scare the apprentices. He came forward and told his story to the magistrate, who had no idea what to do with the information or with this man. But nothing else in history can be found about John Graham. Nothing. He went to the magistrate, he told them what was going on, and then it's like he vanished from history. Most people today believe that John Graham was actually the Hammersmith ghost, who turns out was just a man. Now, my question is, what in the world was this guy thinking? Shooting at a ghost. I mean, you can't actually shoot a ghost. So if this guy was shooting anything alive, it would be human, right? I know fear makes humans act in all kinds of crazy and really stupid ways. I often say don't judge someone by their choices made while they're terrified. We can't think straight when we're seriously frightened. So if you're someone who's not good in a crisis, maybe don't have a gun when you might be seriously scared. Welcome. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So I think we can all agree that nobody wants to shoot and kill someone by mistake. And if you're somebody who wants to kill people, you're not doing it by mistake. But that is the story of the Hammersmith ghost. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, if you can, leave me a like, or if you want to subscribe, that would be awesome. It's hugely helpful to me. It takes you 2 seconds. Other than that, do me a favor. Be nice to yourself. Drink more water. Call your mom if you can. She misses you. Get more sleep. And I will check you next time. Bye.